Nazis controlling Germany. Role of propaganda. Hitler believed propaganda was all, the message being more important than the substance. Hitler said after his trial in 1923, propaganda, propaganda, all that matters is propaganda. In Mein Kampf, Hitler said propaganda was for everyone, stating, calling the masses' attention to certain fact. Nazi propaganda was an understanding of popular appeal. Hitler knew this, stating, it must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over. Goebbels was appointed Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda in March 1933. He built the image of Nazism as a political religion. His aim was to develop the concept of the cult of the Führer and for national rebirth as the creation of a new Germany. The ability to place Hitler above all politics meant that fundamentally illegal acts such as Kristallnacht 1938 can be interpreted as the work of subordinates. They used propaganda to degrade their opponents, to indoctrinate, to enforce conformity, and to protect their Nazi ideology in the hope to convert all Germans to Nazis. Posters. Posters were essential in proclaiming Nazi ideas. Dramatic images and giant lettering offered the audience an immediate and simplistic messages. Posters were celebrated a reduction in unemployment and the Autobahn motorway. They also glorified the Führer and desensitized attitudes towards the Jews by using stereotypical, dehumanized images. They were also used to raise morale in the war by depicting Hitler as a man of destiny. Newspapers. Germany boasted a strong, varied and independent press. This was hard for the Nazis to exploit. Only 1 in 20 Nazi voters was influenced by newspapers. Goebbels' aim from 1933 onwards was to control existing newspapers and to promote the party's own propaganda newspapers. The Editor's Law of October 1933 called for racial pure journalism, meaning Jewish, communist and socialist newspapers were dismissed. It also restricted what editors could publish, resulting in harsh punishments. The State Press Agency, the DNB, was set up in December 1933, which monitored all news materials. Goebbels allowed some liberal papers such as the Berliner Tageblatt to report mildly political disagreeing news to form the illusion to the Nazis didn't have total control. Other papers were mainly pro-Nazi papers such as the Der Stürmer and the Volkischer Beobachter. The aim of the press was mainly to maintain and reinforce the already existing support rather than creating new support. Radio. Germany had the largest radio audience in Europe in the 30s. The government produced the People's Radio, costing 35 Reichsmarks, which was little more than the weekly wage of a factory worker. The Nazis had speakers in factories, schools, offices and shops. They even erected loudspeakers in public places on pillars. A law was introduced which made listening to foreign broadcast a capital offence, which had the death penalty. Hitler's broadcast after the failure of the bomb plot in 1944 was vital as it restored confidence in the regime. Film. The cinema offered Nazism an ideal medium to spread its ideology. The mass audiences were skillfully exploited by a regime which championed dynamism, unity, violence, and revolution. The director, Leni Riefenstahl, produced a number of powerful propagandist films such as The Triumph of Will 1935, which featured the Nuremberg Rally. Films also played a key role in dehumanizing the Jews. The film Jude Seuss 1940 was very effective in reinforcing anti-Semitic prejudices. Cinema was also successful at generating nationalism and materialism with its portrayal of heroism and sacrifice. Events. A Nazi propaganda success was its orchestration of grandiose events such as the ceremonial torchlit march through the Brandenburg Gate to celebrate Hitler's appointment as Chancellor on the 30th of January 1933 and Potsdam Day on the 21st of March 1933, in which Hitler consolidated his alliance with the army in Germany. The success of the Olympic Games in 1936 was vital. The regime suspended its anti-Semitic program and held the Games in an atmosphere of political stability and growing prosperity, which impressed foreign visitors and the foreign governments. Ritual. Holy days were changed with a series of festivals or celebration days. Seizure of Power, Nazi Party Foundation, National Day of Labour, Mothering Sunday, Anniversary of the Munich Putsch. These marginalized traditional Christian practices. It became so common that it was no longer identified as propaganda, but simply as a part of a new social and political order. Youth. Nazi aim was to have the younger generations of Germans to be fully immersed in Nazi propaganda. The indoctrination of young people became a primary objective to the dictatorship. Jewish and left-wing teachers were dismissed, and a new syllabus was introduced which marginalised religion to allow time for physical education. All subjects had to be taught in a way that conformed Nazi ideology. History glorified German victories and warned the young of a Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy and denounced the stab-in-the-back myth. Biology was used to demonstrate survival of the fittest, being the Aryans. Special elite schools such as the Adolf Hitler schools and order castles were created to create future political leaders. Boys were taught to be soldiers in the German young people from 10 to 14 years old, and the Hitler youth from 14 to 16-year-olds. Girls were taught to be loyal, submissive, and prolific mothers in the League of Maidens at the age of 10 and the League of German Girls at the age of 14. Membership of these organizations became compulsory in 1936. An oath of allegiance to Hitler had to be sworn from 1939 onwards. There was scouting-related luxuries as a relief to the endless drilling, lecturing, and discipline which created a blind loyalty to the Führer. Cultural propaganda. Music. Music accompanied almost all staged events and celebrations. It was used to make the Germans feel superior and invincible. Jewish composers such as Mahler were banned, and jazz was denounced as decadent. The regime favoured classical and romantic works of Beethoven and especially Wagner. The Wagner Festival became an annual highlight of the Third Reich. Art. Modern art was rejected as decadent, tainted by Jewish corruption and exploitation. A degenerate modern art exhibition was held in Munich in 1937, but it attracted an embarrassingly large audience. Artists were encouraged to glorify the nation, heroism, and the family. Hitler was always portrayed as solitary, resolute, and godlike in paintings. Architecture. It was to be the key symbol of Nazi power. Hitler's favourite architect was Ludwig Trust, who adopted a monumental neoclassical style well suited to the regime's aims to dwarf the individual before a colossus of state might. Hitler's favourite architect later changed to Albert Speer, who designed the Olympic Stadium in 1936. Successes. Maintaining supporters was easy, but others cooperated to the system through fear, ignorance, lethargy, and indifference rather than genuine support. It successfully projected the image of a legal seizure of power in 1933. The Reichstag fire fueled popular fears of a communist revolution. Potsdam Day also allowed Hitler to secure the Enabling Act. Anti-Semitic propaganda did gradually erode sensitivities, so that the political and economic marginalization of the Jews was taken for granted in 1938, which made the Jews look evil, resulting in Kristallnacht. Propaganda can be seen as responsible for ensuring that the majority in German society followed the regime without question. Even when faced with defeat from 1943 onwards, many Germans remained convinced that the Führer would find some miracle weapon to overcome the overwhelming odds. Limitations. Many Germans were horrified by the parade to celebrate Hitler's appointment of Chancellor in 1933. It was clear that the regime was unable to overcome the Christian values of most Germans. The dictatorship failed to create public opinion on the central issues of expansionism, war, and racial persecution. There was no enthusiasm for the Anschluss with Austria in March 1938 or for war during the Sudetenland in September. Many Germans were appalled by the violence of Kristallnacht in November 1938, and Hitler henceforth then needed for deception and secrecy in his future persecution. The defeat at Stalingrad and the bombings of German cities undermined the credibility of Nazi propaganda. Historian David Wells said, "The history of Nazi propaganda during the war is one of declining effectiveness.